Last year I was here talking about a very similar topic. We showed up for a session and we had 8 people in the room. And so when we were sort of planning for this year, I was thinking, we'll have 20, 25 maybe. So it's good to see that so we're getting a little bit more uptick in attendance as time goes by. Can everybody hear me in the back? I think the mic's well adjusted. Thank you very much. I'm Erin Peterson, and I head up our ad platform evangelism team. It's a relatively new team here at Microsoft. We're about 4 months old. And we give our customers guidance on how they can make sense of our architectures. We also solicit from our customers feedback in terms of what we can do to make our architectures more useful for our customers. And at the end of my deck, you'll see our alias for our team. Feel free to contact us directly. We also have a blog that we've just started as well, and that's another good place to interact with us. If somebody in the back could hit the door. Hey, Eric, would you mind hitting the door? Excellent. Thank you. What I'm going to be talking about today is Monetization 101. And in doing test runs for this session, I found that what people were really interested in was getting an overview of the basics, getting a sense for within the ecosystem how we're considering building out platforms, how we're thinking about the technologies, and beginning to make sense of it there. What is going to be out of scope in this session is design. We're not going to be talking very much about design. There was a great session yesterday that Eric Schmidt did around Silverlight. There's a really, really good session this afternoon with Alam Ali about ad formats, and I think the design stuff is very well covered off in those sessions. I'm also not going to be giving a deep dive into the technology itself. I'm not going into detail on ad servers. There's a really good presentation tomorrow morning. I think it's at 8:15. It's at some ungodly hour, but it's tomorrow morning. It's being given by Eric Picard, and that's a great place to go if you're looking for deeper detail. What I'm going to be talking about is how we're starting to think about the ecosystem and platforms itself. And a while ago, I was looking for a metaphor that I could wrap this in that would make sense to people. And one of the things that I had thought about but dismissed was the idea of a gold rush and how that has impacted the development of ecosystems, or how it's a metaphor for the development of ecosystems. And a few weeks back, I had an opportunity to, in Seattle's the Klondike Museum, and I had passed the Klondike Museum. And it's actually a 2-part museum. Part of it's in Seattle, the other part's in Alaska. It's the only 2-part museum in the country. And I really had to reset my expectations in terms of what a good metaphor this is. And I'll walk through and I'll explain why I thought it was a bad one and why it's a good one. So a lot of times, when people think about the people who really made money in the gold rush, they think about people like Philip Armour, who developed cheap meat selections for the miners, later went on to build Armour Meats. Levi Strauss, of course, very famous example. He made all of his money selling jeans to the miners. And there's also John Studebaker, who made his money initially by selling wheelbarrows to the miners, and then, of course, branched out into cars and automotives. And a lot of times, particularly now, when people are a little more educated about who makes money and why and how in an ecosystem, this is sort of dismissed as a hoary cliche. That the only people who make money when a boom is going on are the people who sell the picks and shovels, for example, the people who sell the bits and pieces associated with making something take off. But what I began to realize when I started wrapping my head around what the gold rush was about was that I had completely missed how gold rushes made people money. And I think it's very instructive when we think about how advertising and how an advertising ecosystem and an advertising platform makes its participants money. What I found is that the gold rush itself took place in 8 different places at 8 different times, and this was a successive path. And when those were occurring, there was a couple of things that these gold rushes shared. They each shared, obviously, an initial rush toward the gold. They each shared increasingly investment at very consistent stages in each of these gold rushes in which participants made money in different but consistent ways. They each showed a growth of infrastructure. And incidentally, as these gold rushes took place in succession, this infrastructure started to be applied again and again and again across these gold rushes, made it easier for people to make money faster. There was a development of standards. This was another thing that I had completely missed in my initial understanding of the gold rushes. And increasingly, there was an increase in the value of the knowledge of the participants themselves. One of the places that this can be seen is in these successive gold rushes, what would happen by the time you got to the third or the fourth one, by the time, for example, people were hopping on boats and going to New Zealand, is that the people who were participating in that gold rush had participated in earlier gold rushes and brought with them their knowledge and understanding of how this is supposed to work. Helped each successive one grow faster, make people more money. And you can see, of course, where I'm going with this and how much this resembles a platform. In the first stage of a gold rush, you basically have a couple people showing up with picks and shovels, stuff they can carry with them, and just trying to figure out if there's even any money there. Very little equipment, very little education, very low tech. You just have a couple of guys showing up. By the way, I use the term guys in a very gender-neutral way, so as I use guys for this presentation, I hope everybody sort of gets that with me. The second stage, you'll see people showing up and basically saying, hey, there's a little bit of gold there. Maybe we should give this a shot. And what you have are teams of people working together using some small amount of equipment that's sort of standardized. They can build it on site, they bring the pieces with them, and a couple guys get together. And in this case, they're sluicing for the money. They're taking the gold out of the rivers, panning it through. It's just slight advancement in technology over the pickaxes. That's not really that great. Doesn't scale particularly well. They're still taking the gold, putting it in a sack, dragging it all over into the nearest town, and hoping to make some money off it. In the third stage, you get to a point where people are saying, all right, let's rock this out. Let's go ahead and put some money into it. Let's go ahead and get a lot of people here on site. There's obviously gold here. We can make money here. The analytics have shown us that, hey, this particular place produces money. So let's invest in the infrastructure. Let's bring in the bankers. Let's borrow some money. Let's build out railroads. Let's build out the mines. Let's build out the equipment. And let's really take all the money out of this that we can. And then when you hit a gold mine at scale, it begins to look something like this, which is completely different than a couple of guys with pickaxes. And interestingly, by the time you get to this point, it's no longer one person going in with a pickaxe able to make enough money out of this. It's privately owned. All the gold mines have been brought together. There's one fundamental beneficiary in the mine owner. And then when people are making money at this stage, this is the stage at which people who can plug into this ecosystem, who can plug into what's effectively a platform, can figure out other ways to make money. It's also the point at which it's pretty much left to hobbyists and big co. If you don't have the money to start a huge mine, you can go out there and have fun. But if you're not supplying ancillary services, you're probably not going to start a huge mining company at this stage in the game. So you all see where I'm going with this, I hope. To understand how I'm going to make the leap from gold mining to an advertising platform, a monetization platform, it helps to understand the basic ecosystem behind it. And the three primary participants in this ecosystem, the three primary classes of participants in this ecosystem, are the advertisers, the publishers, and the readers. I prefer the term readers to users because I find users to be a cold word, and most of the time people reading it are engaging with it in a somewhat deeper way than just quickly flipping through the pages. Advertisers themselves are the primary focus, particularly right now in this stage of the game, of how money flows through this ecosystem. And they're the primary focus because, frankly, they control the money that flows through the ecosystem. So if you're going to be trying to extract money from here, it helps to know where the money's coming from. And within the advertising ecosystem, the purse strings to this money tend to be held either by advertisers directly themselves or by agencies who are acting as proxies to these advertisers. This is an important distinction to understand because it helps to know when you build something or where you're trying to fit in this ecosystem if you're going to be dealing directly with advertisers or if you're going to be dealing with agencies, because the ways that you interact with these two groups of people are very, very different. At a big advertiser, what basically happens is you'll have a product manager. The joke I always use is there's some 25-year-old product manager out there with a $50 million ad budget, and they have to figure out how to spend it. Basically, you've got this product manager. The product manager will call their ad agency. The ad agency will say, all right, this is how we can go ahead and spend your money. The ad agency will then go to a media buyer, and the media buyer puts together a plan that says, all right, if you, Mr. Product Manager, trying to spend your $50 million budget, needs to reach these people between these ages and these locations, these are the best mechanisms for doing so. This is how much it's going to cost. And if they sign off and if it meets the reach that the product manager is looking for, the media buyer goes ahead and executes the sale. And then the media buyer has to step back and look at the format itself. Like we've been presenting some great formats here at MIX. And they'll say, all right, does this already exist as a format? Does this not exist as a format? If it already exists as a format, TV ads are a great example. TV ads exist as a format. It's very easy to sign off and just say, hey, go ahead and make that buy. If it doesn't exist as a format, or if it doesn't meet the reach, it's very hard for that media buyer, acting on behalf of that product manager, to go ahead and make the purchase. And oftentimes that just doesn't happen. One of the most instructive lessons I got in going out and talking to customers was talking to a product manager in Europe who said point blank in this meeting of about 200 people, when I said, you guys know that internet advertising performs better than TV, why are you still spending all your money on TV? And he said, look, I'm not going to get fired for buying a TV commercial. I'm like, all right. I mean, that's basic economic decision. He's not getting fired. Buying in the internet so far hasn't been proven to him. It's not as easy. It's not a typical format. And he can't necessarily sign off on the budget. And again, this is at the big advertisers. When you're dealing with the small advertisers, Billy Bob's bait and tackle down the street, your local newsstand, your local plumber, it's much, much, much simpler. There's an advertiser. The advertiser says, hey, I need an ad. And the advertiser buys an ad. They tend to buy these ads where it's easy for them to do so, which is why some of the contextual programs have taken off. The keyword-based advertising has taken off. Yellow Pages is very, very easy. There's literally a sales guy that comes to your shop. You go ahead and you sign off. You make the buy. It's that straightforward. In this case, the advertiser doesn't have to worry about creative. They don't have to worry about anything other than basically signing the IO or giving over their credit card number. So it's very, very simple. So when you're looking at how you fit into the ecosystem at this point, one of the things you can already start to narrow down is, am I wanting to work with big advertisers or am I wanting to work with small advertisers? When I was talking before about the formatting question, something that I hear again and again and again from particularly small companies, from emerging companies, from startups is, but we've got this really cool format. We've got this really cool thing we want to monetize. The fact of the matter is there's this Internet Advertising Bureau. They set the formats for the advertising. And as I said a few minutes ago, where the product manager and the media buyer get together, figure out what to buy, basically, if it's not an IAB format, if the ad is a non-standard format, it's going to be really hard to get in the budget. Most of the times, it's not going to get there at all. The exception, of course, is something like Second Life. And this is an exception because it's not at all a standardized buy. And it worked out very, very well for Second Life. But a couple things to be aware of are that it can work very well. It takes an enormous amount of time. And it also takes a commitment of sales resources on your side. Because you just can't go into an agency and say, here's my format, you have to go ahead and you have to back the building of a sales team. It's usually a biz dev team that goes out and conducts these deals on your own. So you'd be looking for people who are willing to experiment. Coca-Cola is doing some really great stuff. Their particular digital marketing guy is very willing to throw money at innovative things. But these are basically going to be one-off deals driven by your biz dev team. So effectively, if you go back to the metaphor I was using earlier, this is still the pick and shovel stage. Even as a publisher, you're not going to see any platform scale. You're not going to see any use to having cut many of these deals. They're all going to look differently. From an advertiser's perspective, same thing. You're just going to cut these deals one off, one off, one off. They can, however, be quite lucrative, and the margins are very high. Standardizing, though, isn't a problem. Some people come to me and say, hey, you know what? I've got this great new ad format. There's a great startup I met with 2 weeks ago that falls squarely into this category. I thought what they're building is amazing. It's the first time in a long time that I've seen something. I thought, that is really cool, and I can see myself spending an hour a day doing that. But what they're trying to sell isn't standardized at all. And they're sort of complaining about this. And what I pointed out to them was, 10 years ago, there was over 150 different ad formats circulating through the internet. It's one of the reasons that it was very, very hard for big companies to get traction and spending money. There's no 25-year-old product manager out there who's going to manage 150 different ad formats. So just as we saw in railroad, just as we saw in cars, just as we saw in even shoe production and manufacturing, as standards are put into place, these industries grow up larger around it. So if you can figure out where you fit into this framework overall and leverage that, you'll ultimately make more money. Coming at it from the perspective of publishers, I sort publishers into two different buckets. Publishers who are using a standard format and publishers who are using a non-standard format. And I find this to be useful A lot of other people separate publishers into large publishers versus small publishers, head publishers versus tail publishers. But I have found that publishers using the same kind of format have much more in common than simply their size or where they fit in the relative body here. Publishers who are using standardized formats, really good example is Wall Street Journal, have the standard formats, they roll them out into the ecosystem, makes it easy for everybody to buy. I think we've already been over that point. The publishers with the non-standard formats tend to have to use different tools. They fit into this advertising ecosystem in a different way, and they have to approach the problem in a whole different way because of the way they interact with advertisers. An example of what it sort of looks like at the sluicing stage, we've got a couple of guys with rudimentary tools. Rudimentary is the wrong word. This is one of our tools. Using early stage tools would be Wall Street Journal. And if you look down here in the lower right corner, you'll see this little red box that is around their sponsored links. That's a tool that we've built in-house. There's several other tools on the market. Some of them are much broader use than our own at this point. And this is a very simple contextual tool. It's a standard format. They just go ahead and they just fit it into their page, and they go from there. As an advertiser, very, very easy to buy this. You put together some keywords. You put up a little bit of text. There's your ad. And as a publisher, it's very, very easy to serve this. You don't have to worry about disrupting your experience. You don't worry about, hey, what's this going to look like when it actually shows up on people's pages. It's very reliable. And if you're doing the non-standard format size, you're going to have your own sales team. You're really not going to be able to find that you can plug easily into an ad network, which we'll get to later. It's not going to be very easy to plug into an agency. And there are a variety of tools on the market to help facilitate your ability to put in place your own ad sales team and make that easier for advertisers to understand. One of the tools on the marketplace that I particularly have found to be useful is a tool that we have now, we didn't have it a year ago, out of Atlas called Atlas Ad Manager. And effectively what this does is allows you to put a team in place in-house, sell your inventory, and run it as efficiently as a larger company is able to run their sales house. Many of these applications, this one in addition to those, can be run either standalone on your own desktops, your own server in your own office. They can also be run as a service, in which case Atlas would go ahead and host it for you. There are opportunities now. They're burgeoning, but they're rare. And this is a point of inefficiency in the marketplace for anybody who's interested. There are places where you can partner with third-party sales houses where those salespeople are developing an expertise in selling this inventory, can see higher yield, and can package these together in a way that is more palatable to the advertisers and more lucrative to the publishers. Something else to think about if you're building out within the non-standard format space for publishers. You can also do what I call dragging your ore to the mill, which is using one of the ad exchanges out there. And an ad exchange is a very simple way where many advertisers, many publishers can come together. Advertisers can say, hey, this is what I'm looking for. I have no idea which publisher I'm going to get it from. And a publisher can plug in and say, hey, I can go ahead and supply that. I can supply that audience. I can supply that reach. I can supply that time of day reach. They take the ad. They agree on the price, generally blindly through an exchange. Occasionally it's negotiated. It's fairly rare nowadays. And through the context of this exchange, the ad gets populated out to the publisher. Something to be aware of, and this has come up for me many times recently as a question, is when I fit into this ecosystem, what part of the pie am I looking at? I know from my own experience right now, it's very, very hard to make commitments or make predictions around how much money you can make online. But it's relatively easy to get a feel for where you would fit in terms of this overall ecosystem. If, for example, you're a large publisher dealing with a media agency, in this case we can use iVillage, for example, you'll probably see the media agency getting about a 10% commission, so about 90% of that goes into your pocket. Once you get down to the small to medium publishers, very, very small, Billy Bob's Bait and Tackle throws up a website showing fishing conditions at Flathead Lake, you're probably dealing with an ad network who's going to see a much larger revenue share. These revenue shares aren't always published. But typically, they're running at about 60%. And as a small to medium publisher, you're going to see about 30%. And if you're working through a media agency, the media agency is going to take some off the top. But typically, you wouldn't be aware of that if you were a small to medium-sized publisher buying through the ad network. And as you can see, there's a bit of a range through here. Large publishers will occasionally go through ad networks as well. typically when a large publisher is going through an ad network, it's because they have a lot of additional remnant inventory on their site. So maybe they only want to monetize the top 100 pages of their site, but they have 5,000 pages of content. And so they put that extra content, that remnant inventory, in through an ad network just to see what they get for it, under the idea, well, it's better to get something than to get nothing. And then there are large publishers who engage in remnant arbitrage. I won't go into the gory details here. That will be covered off tomorrow morning, though. And in this case, they're willing to give up a bit more to the ad networks. The ad network will take about 50%, the large publishers taking about 40%. Readers. Readers fall into two classes, the notoriously fickle and the maddeningly distracted. And this is something that was quoted to me a few weeks ago by a very frustrated publisher. What we find with the readers themselves is that they are drawn to really good content. And I don't care how big an installed user base is, I don't care how many people are set up on your social community site, they're fickle. They're not necessarily going to be there 5 to 10 years out. You have to have content there that's compelling. You have to have an experience that's compelling. And you have to have a reason for people to come back to your site over and over and over again. They're also very distracted when they get there, particularly younger users. We're not talking about the days of TV where a family would sit around in front of a TV, they'd all watch the same TV show. We're talking about an age where people are sitting in front of the laptop. I watch my own kids watching TV, reading a book, IMing to each other, and talking to us all at the same time. You don't have the sort of attention that you used to. And so when you're trying to reach out to these readers, to the people who are consuming your content, you have to think about from the perspective of an advertiser. And this is where you sort of put your publisher hat on instead of your editorial hat. You think about from the perspective of an advertiser, what is it that I can explain to the advertisers about my audience that's going to make my audience more valuable to the advertisers? And what kind of audience is it that I want to attract? Occasionally I'll be out talking to a startup, and they're very, very keen on building something that's going to attract, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of millions of users a year. And what I try and walk them through is, it's not the volume of people who come to your site that matters, it's the quality of the audience once they get there. And some people might be happier. You have to think about what your business model is. You might be happier building a site that has a smaller scope in terms of the number of people you expect to reach, but because it has a very crisp scope, the people that you're bringing to the site are potentially more attractive to advertisers. And if you can market yourself that way, you're much better off in the end. I'm going to go ahead and walk through 3 examples here. This is a sort of example that I've been using for a while, but this particular example that I've been using lately comes from a great blog, and I put the link to the blog on the end of the deck so you guys can go ahead and find it later. This first example I refer to as panning for CPM. And where this example starts off is with the assumption that you're going to want to make about 50 million a year from your site. So if you look at a standard situation where you're just going to build a really big site, get as many people coming to it as possible, and all you want to do is draw traffic, so this sort of undifferentiated traffic coming to the site, you're probably looking at about $1 per thousand. And that can come to you in a couple of different ways. CPA programs will typically average around there, and this is very, very broad. Cost per click programs will typically average out about there. And what you'd be looking at in order to yield that 50 million is about 50 billion impressions a year. It's doable. An example that I give here is Wikipedia. Wikipedia gives about 55 million uniques a month. There's a distinction that you should be making too, and I keep getting reminded of this every time I give this deck, between impressions and unique visitors. You can have a unique visitor coming back to your site multiple times in a month, seeing the ads many times, and so you can have a much higher rate of impressions than you can unique visitors. The reason I give these statistics at the bottom is just to give you a sense of what kind of site you'd be competing against in any of these ranges to draw this kind of revenue. So in this case, Wikipedia gets about 55 million uniques per month, and overall, if you were seeing $1 RPM, you'd be at about 50 million this way. Another example, sort of the sluicing example here. This is where you're using some tools. You've probably got some website analytics. You're trying to get a feel for who on my site has proven to be profitable, who do I want to keep coming back to my site, and the content is a little bit more specialized. So you're probably looking at about $5 RPM. You're probably looking at about 10 billion impressions per year. And overall, this nets out at about 50 million. To give you a rough sizing guideline of what kind of site you'd have to be, how much traffic you'd have to be drawing to get to 10 billion impressions a year, Microsoft.com as a website hovers right around that mark. You probably have to be just above that in order to generate this kind of traffic. And then if you're mining, this is where you've got a very clear sense of who your audience is. You've been running your analytics tools. You've been drawing the consistent audience over and over and over again. Maybe you're Hemmings Motor News. Maybe you're a very specialized fashion shopping site. Maybe you're a very specialized car site, health and beauty site. And you're probably drawing about $20 RPM, which is very high. It's attainable. It's high. And you're looking at about 2.5 billion impressions per year. One example, as I used earlier on, Hemmings Motor News, by my estimations, this is not public or posted anywhere. By my estimations, this is about the sort of range you'd be in terms of traffic. Alexa is a good place to go and try and figure out roughly where websites are in terms of traffic and roughly the kind of content and community you'd have to build to sustain that sort of traffic. Analytics, as I'd mentioned a bit ago, it can be very, very important at this point. So there are a lot of different analytics packages. I'll touch on this a little bit more deeply later on, but Forrester has shown that you get about a 1,500% return on an analytics investment. And this is analytics on the side of the publisher, not on the side of the advertiser, but it's on the publisher side. And it helps you figure out, these are the people that I want to keep coming back to my site, or maybe these are the people who come to my site already, and they're staying the longest, so I want to put out more content that's attractive to them, and then in turn potentially attractive to advertisers. On this slide, I've tried to pull together an easy to read, hopefully it's easy to read, overview of this ecosystem in general as I just walked through it. And what you'll see here is the progression from advertisers to publishers through ad exchanges. Notice that I don't have the readers on here. I'm just sort of assuming the readers are in the mix. But I've given examples of each of these as well, and you can see how they feed into each other. The advertiser will typically go through a creative agency. The creative agency will typically go through a media agency. They'll meet either directly with the publisher or they'll go through an ad exchange. And then the publishers either go directly to the advertisers themselves, they'll go to an ad exchange, or they'll go through a publisher aggregator. This typically is smaller sites, and they as a group will go through the ad exchange. And what you find is that this ecosystem has become much more sophisticated and much more centralized also in the last 2 to 5 years. Because last year it's really heating up. And you'll see that there are a variety of players within this marketplace. So from an advertiser perspective, you probably know who the 50 biggest advertisers are in the world. Procter & Gamble's up there, General Mills. We've got Microsoft and Google, Yahoo, spend a tremendous amount of money online. Amazon, Target, huge budgets online. For creative agencies, there are some of the more digitally oriented, such as Razorfish. Silverlight is a tool that's often used by these creative agencies. iBlaster is a tool. The tools, incidentally, are in black. The agencies themselves are in red. And the way the creative agencies plug into this platform that I'm going to be talking about in a minute is through these tools themselves. And the tools can range from the design tools that I've mentioned, such as Silverlight, to tools they themselves build internally that run on their own desktops. There are media agency tools that are used by the media agencies. An example of this is the Atlas Media Console. And effectively what this does is allow the media agency to manage in a way other than faxes, pen, and paper, how these buys are transacted, how these buys are performing. Did you go ahead and meet the targets that you were intending to meet? The ad exchanges themselves are increasingly sophisticated. You've got AdECN, which is an offering that we have within Microsoft. We acquired about a year ago. The DoubleClick exchange, which is a great example of a highly efficient exchange. Some of you might have seen that in the keynote mentioned on Wednesday. And the publisher aggregators can take a couple of different forms. You can be looking at something like AdSense, which is the text-based solution offered by Google. There's DrivePM, which is a solution that we have now internally. There's Massive, which is another, it's a form of in-game advertising, for those of you who are not familiar with it. But Massive aggregates on behalf of advertisers, some of the video game companies, and allows the advertisers to buy their ads there. And you can be looking at the far end on publishers, the very big publishers, MSN, Google, Yahoo, all of whom use their own internal tools they've built internally to handle the volume of ads and advertisers that they're dealing with, all the way down to the traditional publishers like NBC. And this is where the smaller publishers would fall in as well. Billy Bob's Bait and Tackle, the example that I use frequently. We can go back to this at the end, too, in case anybody has any questions here. Going through the Microsoft advertising platforms and products is right now occasionally an exhaustive exercise. Some of you might have noticed we've made a few acquisitions over the last year. From an evangelism perspective, it's given us quite a bit to talk about. We have about 10 different ad platforms, products. There's a little bit of a sort of occasionally arguments between whether something should be called a platform or a product. But I'll give you a high-level overview of what we have in-house. And the reason I'm giving to you this first is so that when I get to the ecosystem part, you'll have a sense for what are the pieces that from a Microsoft perspective we're pulling into what we're starting to think of as a platform that makes sense for our community. But this is not exclusive to Microsoft. And everything that I'm talking about here has a corollary in the non-Microsoft world. And those companies are building very similar platforms as well. And in the end, these should all be interoperable with each other. The display ad platform that we have internally is called Ad Expert. This is not something that's available publicly. There's no public-facing APIs, for example, and it was never built to be publicly accessible. When it was built to monetize Mungo Park, I don't even know if people remember Mungo Park anymore. See, you remember Mungo Park. When it was built back then, there was no concept that someday there'd be a need for this sort of ecosystem. They just sort of built this to serve and monetize and track their own ads. It serves advertisers. It serves all the MSM publishers, and then there are a couple of other publishers who use it as well. These are very, very rare. Internally, it's bulletproof. It's ugly. It's not necessarily something just like any other piece of proprietary software that you want to release into the marketplace and say, here, have fun with this. It's not user-friendly from that perspective, but the thing is bulletproof. It doesn't go down. It's highly reliable, highly scalable. And incidentally, it delivers display ads. One of the things that I have not covered off on very well is the difference between display ads and auction-based ads, which I'll get to in a minute. Display ads are typically the rich media ads, anything with a picture, basically, and these are generally sold by sales teams, sales houses. When you get to Ad Center, you're starting to talk about text-based ads, keyword-based purchases. Very rarely an image associated with it. It's usually a couple of lines of text, and it's very, very easy to put together. It's usually sold by auction. Ad Center is our tool for doing this. There's a couple of tools on the marketplace that allow you to do this, but it's a way effectively for direct response advertising. Some people use it for brand advertising, although there are significant limitations right now if you're using it as a brand advertiser. But it's an opportunity to have a direct response ad out there in a scalable, easy-to-use way. Easy to use from the perspective of an advertiser. I remember when I was running my first startup, day one, we had ads out on the internet because all we did was throw together some creative right after breakfast. And it goes all the way up to the larger advertisers. If you are, say, Amazon or eBay or Walmart, and you're making a significant number of ad buys, and you can plug into your platform and think about everything you have in your supply chain, everything you could possibly want an ad for, anything that anybody could possibly generate a keyword for, you go together and you can programmatically put together this creative and get these ads out there. AdECN, talked about a bit ago. This is our network exchange product. It provides liquidity for ad networks, makes it a little bit easier for advertisers to execute buys across a variety of publisher websites. An analytics tool is a tool that allows typically the publisher, as I mentioned before, to give a sense for how their package is performing overall for them and how potentially it could work for advertisers. This is one of the acquisitions we've made over the last year, Deep Metrics, and it's now been recently re-released as Ad Center Analytics. Here's an example of what this looks like. As you can see, it's a very simple UI. We don't yet have APIs released to it, but we expect that down the road, you'd be able to plug into the APIs we have associated with it and build tools that make sense for your publishing network or for yourself or for your users. Massive is our in-game advertising package. And this is probably one of the sexiest offerings. People get very excited about this. This is where you can go into a game, and as you're doing a car racing game, for example, you can see an ad populate on the street as you're racing by. The opportunity here can be very lucrative for the publishers of these games. The opportunity can be very useful for the advertisers. These convert very well. They reach an audience, young males between the ages of 18 and 26, that has moved away from TV and is increasingly difficult to reach. But if you think back to what I said about taking advantage of an ecosystem, each of these ads has to be individually built. Each of these sales has to be individually negotiated. And there's very little opportunity at present to scale this out. So if you are thinking about, are there places in an advertising ecosystem as, for example, a designer, where I can plug myself in, the advantage to having little infrastructure here is that there's also very little friction. If you talk to the people, you can build a good ad. It's a little bit easier to insert yourself in here. But again, there's no opportunity to take advantage of scale associated with it. Screen Tonic is our mobile advertising product. Several of these in the marketplace. It addresses the worldwide mobile industry, which is growing rapidly. And right now we're focused pretty much on the carriers and on the publishers themselves of the content associated with these characters. Atlas Ad Manager, we've talked about a little bit here. This is a place where if you decide, hey, I'm going to go ahead and run my own format internally, hire my sales team, it's a tool that you can bring in-house, plug your sales team into it, and be selling advertising relatively quickly. Atlas Media Console came up on the slide that I showed the progression from advertisers to publishers. And it's a tool that allows advertisers and agencies to make consolidated ad buys. It gives them one interface through which they can start to think about their advertising and how it's performing. Keyword Services Platform is one of my very favorite products right now. This is the only one that we have in this deck that doesn't have a corollary outside Microsoft. And what Keyword Services Platform does is allows any individual user from an advertiser side or a publisher side who is worried about keywords, either keyword generation for advertising or keyword monetization on the publisher side, to figure out, hey, how much is this keyword going to cost me? Or the corollary, hey, how much is this keyword going to make me? So it's been in the marketplace for about a year now for advertisers. We're just getting ready to release a version for publishers. From a publisher perspective, it will allow you, for example, to plug in a bunch of keywords and figure out what's going to perform. So if you've got an article on cell phones, for example, the phrase cell phones will return a particular amount of revenue, but the word Nokia, for example, or the name of a specific cell phone will return a different level of revenue. So it allows you to figure out, in some cases, maybe even what you want to write about. If you're doing reviews of cell phones, one cell phone monetizes very well, one cell phone doesn't monetize very well. It might skew a little bit about what you're writing about or how you present it. More importantly, though, if you don't want to shift your editorial content this way, and that can be a bad experience for a reader, it allows you to make sure that the keywords that you're using in your content are highlighted in a way for the advertisers to pick up easily, so that you're not leaving revenue on the table just because you didn't make it easy for these advertisers to find these keywords. The reason that this is my favorite tool right now, one of my favorite tools in the industry, is that it's entirely platform agnostic. It's one of the few tools out there that is. You can take everything you learn from this and apply it across all of your ad buys, regardless of the platform through which you're making them. It's also free, which is great. And it gives small advertisers and small publishers the same amount of intelligence about keyword data that the very largest publishers have and that the very largest advertisers have. This is an example of how it works with cell phone. It will not only show you how is this going to monetize today, but it can also show you things like seasonal forecasting. I'm trying to think of a good example. There was some Christmas toy last year, the name of which is escaping me right now. And the keyword prediction said, hey, in September, this isn't going to perform very well, but come November, this is going to perform incredibly well. And it was dead on. The Christmas toy ended up being one of our hottest toys among kids, and that keyword prediction engine worked really, really well. So it gives you trending as well as immediate, hey, this is how this is going to perform for you. ACDM is sort of an outlier. It's very, very old school in terms of a monetization tool that's available. It's an email marketing tool. The email marketing environment is still fairly large. We're at about 22 billion this year. Very, very easy to use. I think we've all gotten email missives in our inboxes asking us to purchase by or think about something, and I think we all pretty much get what email looks like. So what do you do if you're Microsoft? What if you've got these 10 completely different kinds of ad products internally? How do you make sense of them for people? You return to your roots and you build a platform. You go back and you say, all right, how do we take this? How do we take all this stuff together? How do we make it programmatically accessible? How do we put it in front of people and start to have it make sense? And what we did it's now about 9 months ago, was we stepped back, we started with Ad Center, and we extrapolated out what are the core parts of an advertising product that need to be programmatically accessible, and how do we start releasing them into the marketplace? This has led to our rethinking across the board. How are we thinking about making things API accessible? Over the long term, over the period of time in which we're going to do this, how to release this in a way that is consistent? Furthermore, how do we draw on Microsoft's history as a platform company to make sure we do this well and make sure that we do this in a way that makes sense for advertisers and publishers and anybody else involved in this ecosystem? So what you'll see here is down in the bottom in green, and by the way, this is purely examples. This is not indicative of how we're actually doing this. This is just to give you a sense of how we're starting to think about it. We've extrapolated out things like reporting or editorial or inventory prediction or order entry. Order entry is a very basic building block that they all have. And through Ad Center, through what is now our paid search platform, we've made these all accessible via APIs. We're now looking at our other products and saying, how in turn do we make these accessible and when do we make these accessible? With the expectation that as these open up, they can be used in different ways by different partners. If you look up here in the upper right-hand side, you'll see big advertisers, big agencies. They'll likely be going in through the APIs into our ad products and other ad products and our ad platform and figuring out from there, what is it that we want to access? Do we want to build our own tools? Do we want to partner with a tool provider who's going to build tools on our behalf? Do we just want to go ahead and use the UIs that Microsoft is building? And we're completely supportive of however this works. From my own perspective, I've already seen the impact of this in the paid search environment. I've seen other companies get better tools, better UIs into the marketplace, occasionally faster than we've been able to do that for ourselves for paid search. What you'll see in the middle, and this is a very important distinction we started making about a year ago, is that we ourselves are starting to build our own tools on top of the APIs. Nothing within Microsoft forces people to develop well and document well like having to consume their own APIs. It's really driven an unparalleled level of discipline within our engineering organization on the advertising side. Our new UI that's recently come out and our new desktop tool that's come out have been built completely on top of the APIs. And those same APIs that we have been using to build our own tools, we have made available, occasionally in advance of our own tools, out to the public, out into the ecosystem. And we've found that this has been wildly successful. So Ad Center did it first. KSP is fully accessible by APIs. And it's been so successful that as we've stepped back to think about how do we build our platforms, we're realizing that while we started out a year ago, actually about a year and a half ago now, thinking that we had to put everything in our UIs, what we're finding is that it's better for us to make sure that everything's accessible through our APIs, even prior sometimes to our making it available through the UI. Even sometimes if we have no intention of ever capitalizing on it within our UI, but putting it in the marketplace because people have used these in completely unexpected ways. KSP is a great example of that. Before we even had the KSP macros built and applications built, we had the APIs out there, and there were some amazing tools that got built for us. One of our best tools was suggested by a partner who'd seen that these APIs were released, who came to us and said, hey, I've got this tool, which we've taken in-house and we're getting ready to re-release. And then on the other side, we find that there are emerging and traditional marketplaces where we don't know how they're going to use them. We're putting them out there. We're making them available as relatively quickly as we can. We're making them available in a way that's as well documented as we can. And as we think about doing this, we think about it from the perspective of looking at how Microsoft has supported its platforms in the past and holding ourselves to very, very high standards in terms of the accessibility of the APIs, the openness of the APIs, probably seen that we've been being much more open about our APIs lately. The documentation, how quickly we deprecate them, and in general, how well we work with the developer community. Our approach to the platform has been, in other words, to make it scalable. Take something like AdExpert, for example, which is bulletproof. Make it reliable, something that we really struggled with on the Ad Center side, for example, when we first released the APIs. At that point, we were Ad Center, like, hey, let's go ahead and put the APIs out there. And we hadn't yet understood that our customers expected as Microsoft, our APIs are going to be very reliable, highly reliable. We learned that lesson very quickly, and ever since then, the APIs we've released have been incredibly reliable. We've standardized the APIs. And this is an ongoing process for us. One of the things that is leading us to be very conservative in terms of how quickly we roll out APIs associated with the other products is that we don't want to roll out APIs in a way that doesn't make sense for the end users, for the developers. We don't want to roll out competing APIs. We also don't want to deprecate the APIs down the road. One of the lessons we've learned from the paid search industry is that if you release an API, you can't just deprecate it on your customers. You can't give a week's notice, and we've seen this happen a couple of times, and say, hey, we're going to go ahead and we're going to cancel that. Sorry you built whatever major part of your application on top of it. So we've been very, very conservative in how we get this out the door. We've also been clear that we're going to try for as long as possible. I can never make the commitment of always, but as long as possible to keep these free. So within the page search space, there has been occasionally been shifts. In page search, I cite several times because it's the one place in the industry where really good open APIs have emerged. There have been several times where suddenly APIs have gone from a free model to a charge model. It's put some companies out of business. We realized early on that we can't afford to do that, certainly in the paid search space. So we've worked hard to create throttling mechanisms and allow that to be the mechanism by which we continue to make sure it's free, continue to make sure it's profitably taken advantage of. We also have consistent terms of use, and we make the highest use of our data. And these are, again, two things that we've learned mostly from paid search. We've also learned it on the display side around this idea that advertisers in particular want to own their own data, and they want to be able to do whatever it is they want to do with their own data. They want the choice of whether they're going to commingle this data with other places in the ecosystem, if, for example, they're going to make use of something like KSP, but they don't want to be told, hey, you know what, once you've pulled any data through our APIs, that's it. You can't commingle that data with anybody else. You can't commingle it in your own data warehouse, and it can never touch any other data. And that's a tack that has been taken in several parts of the industry and has not been well received and has really shut down innovation and people's ability to take advantage of making multiple ad buys, for example, across multiple channels. So we continue to make those open and publicly accessible and commingle the data. Right now, we're right about here, I'd say, in terms of where we are in releasing the APIs. Sort of at the sluicing stage. We're not at a point yet where we have a consistent framework across all of our ad products. We are at a place, though, where if you want to work with us on it and you want to test out some of the areas in which we're starting to make money, we make it relatively easy for people to do so. And this is our email address, adplatformevangelism@microsoft.com. If you want to go ahead and email that with any additional questions or thoughts that come up afterward, feel free to hit us up there. Other than that, are there any questions? Should we give it the polite 5 seconds to see if anybody else has a question? Oh, yes. You got me at second number 4.
On your keyword monetization you just mentioned a moment ago,
Mm-hmm.
I'm not aware of anybody else doing that. Do you know if doing it?
Do I know if what?
Google or anybody else is planning on it?
Nobody else is planning on that. Oh, it's amazing, and it's free. And by the way, if you don't want to download the whole thing and play around with it, you can go to adlabs@microsoft.com, and there's a couple of places where you can just play with it to test it out. Like you just plug in a keyword, it takes all of 3 seconds there, and it is so much fun. The reason I think that other people are hesitant to release something like this is because it moves into the marketplace a high degree of transparency around how these keywords are performing. From the perspective of Microsoft, we've always taken the stance of how do we help our customers make more money? How do we help them be How do we help them do business better using Microsoft tools? So from our perspective, putting a tool in the marketplace like KSP just helps all of our customers move forward faster. From the perspective of our competitors, occasionally the idea of releasing this keyword data can make it a little bit more difficult for them to maintain a little bit more control over the data itself. Does that make sense?
Okay, Google will lose a fortune if they try to.
Excuse me?
I said Google will lose a fortune if they try to.
I got the Google has a...
Google would lose a fortune if they tried to.
Oh, I don't think they would lose a fortune. So they wouldn't even lose enough to make me happy tomorrow morning, frankly. But what I think is more likely to happen is that, as I've seen with some publishers and some of our advertisers, is that they've been able to take the keyword services platform, plug in how they expect the keywords to perform overall, and start to make predictions on the advertiser side of how they can more efficiently make buys on Google. But more importantly, on the publisher side, it's allowed them to make better predictions on what words monetize better. From that perspective, it helps everybody in the ecosystem. It certainly helps Google. They've got a great tool in AdSense. And if you're a publisher and you're able to predict, hey, this keyword is going to perform really well, you make sure you plug it in there, and you'll see an increase in your AdSense revenues as well, which overall will increase Google's revenues. I don't think they're going to lose a fortune with it.
I don't know. We use Google pretty extensively, and you just mentioned the switch over.
Mm-hmm.
Given with that tool, I would spend a lot less on Google because I would know when not to. I would know, what, this one, it's not going to work for us so much. I focus my efforts elsewhere.
I think that's probably true. I think that where the advantage you have in using the Google tool set is you can see how your keywords have performed for you in the past. So if you want to do that trending on your own, you can certainly use that as a predictor for how you want to make your purchases. But this not only unlocks it in terms of making it much easier, but it also allows you to draw from keyword performance data, not only within Microsoft systems, but in some other platforms we've cooperated with, and also across organic search as well, which gives you a very, very broad perspective into how terms are going to perform. Yes?
What about the possible problem of the keywords driving the content? Because if somebody sees that this keyword, you mentioned yourself, makes that much money, and another keyword doesn't make any money, then there's a possibility that everybody starts writing articles or whatever in a possible way.
I don't think so. Publishers are very, very, very stubborn lot, especially independent publishers. Yes, sorry about. The question was, hey, if you can predict which keywords are going to make money, aren't people just going to go ahead and create content, tell me if I'm paraphrasing properly, that is just going to monetize those keywords? And my answer is not really, because publishers are going to go ahead and they got into the business, in most cases not to make money, because they had something really important that they wanted to say. They had something they were passionate about. They wanted to write about sports. They wanted to write about cell phones. I'm not passionate about cell phones. I understand other people are. And so if you're going to be writing about it anyway, it's an opportunity to say, hey, here are some ways to monetize this that you might otherwise have missed. Very, very, very few publishers are going to try and just monetize things with keywords. If they are, they're just going to put up a link farm and be over with it because it's much easier to do that. Yes?
You said you've dealt with a lot of startups, I'm sure you've seen tons of different content creators. And you were talking about, like, can you kind of touch on making a decision between going through either an aggregator or versus putting together an in-house sales team?
Sure. The question was, as a small publisher, because I've gone out and talked to many of them, particularly over the last couple of years, how do you make the decision between going with an ad network versus putting together a small in-house sales force? I can tell you the advice that I give startups when I'm not talking to them. What I tell them is, hey, if you already have a sales force because you're selling something very specific in the marketplace, and you think, yeah, you know what? We can leverage this sales force to see if we can sell this additional advertising. That can be very, very effective. I don't know if you've run a startup yet. I've run 3 startups so far. And from my perspective, there were situations in which I could not have taken on the overhead, the friction of managing an additional sales team to monetize my website. And in those cases, what the heck, if I made a little bit of extra money, and if I made a substantial money, in one case, if I had a very highly targeted website, it was just as as effective for me to work with and exchange. So the question comes down to not only how much money you're going to make, but at what stage in the life cycle of your startup are you, and what kind of friction can you afford in terms of additional overhead of managing a sales team. That's how I frame it for people. I think there was a question over here. Yes? I just completely spaced the email address from our blog, but Eric Tothrow right here in the first row has it open on his desktop. So come up and grab him afterward and he'll give it to you. I'm really bad at memorizing URLs. Any other questions? In that case, you're all off the hook. Oh, wait, yes.
You asked Eric to step to the mic and shout that out loud.
Are you prepared to hop up to the mic and shout that out?
Yeah.
All right. Great.
Does this thing work? Excellent. It is blogs.msdn.com/adplate. ADPLATE.
I love my team. They save me every time.
If there are a few extra minutes, I wondered if you could go back to one of your, it was a complicated, well,
I'm going to guess.
With a whole lot of information on it, and we went over that rather quickly. I didn't catch everything, and I wondered if you had an extra moment or two, if you could just go over that one more time.
Sure. Let me go ahead and bring that up. I think I know which one you're talking about. This one?
Right, yeah.
All right. So rather than my just taking a deep dive and reviewing it all, if you have specific questions about this, or if you, I'm happy to answer those.
I'm a developer, and I'm just trying to learn as much as I can in a different area. So I'm learning new things. So I really don't have any informed kind of questions to ask.
Okay. Well, there's a couple of different ways we can tackle this. I can go through and give another overview of this slide, similar to the one I just gave. There's a session tomorrow morning in which this slide, not this slide exactly, but this entire ecosystem is going to be going over in much more deep detail, particularly with an eye toward developers. And if you wanted to attend that, that would be an excellent session to attend. I can also make us available through our email alias if you have additional questions, and we can hit those off too.
When is that one tomorrow morning? Is that the first thing in the morning? I have a flight to take.
Tomorrow, so Eric Picard, fortunately, is sitting in the back row. He's giving the session tomorrow morning, and I'm going to bring him up here to answer some questions and give you a quick overview if you want. Do you mind?
Also, they're all
Thanks.
recorded on the MIX website.
So I
Thank you.
created this slide a while ago, so I can talk to it, and Aaron did a good job of going through it. But what we're really talking about here is the total ad ecosystem, all the way from the advertiser who wants to actually make some money by running ads and selling a product or service, all the way to the publisher who's making money by selling ads to the advertiser. And there's a lot of complexity that was covered here, and this is really a slide that tries to get a lot of things across. So all of the text in red down below are names of ad agencies, whether they're creative agencies or media agencies, and I can talk a little bit about that. All of the text in blue is names of publishers. All of the black text is vendors. So some of those vendors are companies with an ad platform or an ad product, and some of those are services companies. So does that start to make the slide make a little more sense to you? Okay, and I've taken across the top here the Microsoft, Google, WPP, Yahoo, and AOL. Those are some of the biggest companies in the space who are actually starting as one entity to cover more and more of the ecosystem. So that's why they're called out separately. And then there's some other key players that are called out down below. I think that some of the things to think about that are a little bit interesting and that maybe wouldn't be clear, because Microsoft and Google are all relatively one idea. WPP is a really good example to walk through for people that aren't in the ad industry. WPP is one of the largest agency holding companies in the world. They are, I've only got a few of the agencies that they own listed here. They own thousands of agencies. And the interesting part is that they have now started buying some of the vendors in the space. So 24/7 Real Media was one of their biggest acquisitions. They bought them last year, and 24/7 Real Media has a lot of stuff associated with it. They own one of the biggest publisher-side ad platforms called Open Ad Stream. They also own a very large ad network. They also own a very large search agency. So there's a lot of things they got with that acquisition that that might be kind of interesting to wrap your heads around. So the idea is, over time, you have the situation with with companies like Microsoft and Google starting to spread a little bit into the agency space, and you've got agencies starting to spread in the technology space. And the question long term is, how is that all going to evolve? And that's some of the stuff I'll talk about tomorrow morning.
And as a developer, one of the things to be aware of here are all the areas in black. Because the areas in black are the services, those are the tools that need to be built. And within the advertising space, there's a lot of room to grow in terms of the technology needs that are there, the adoption of technology, and their ability to digest their desire to purchase these technologies. So from a developer's perspective, if you can step into some of these black areas, if you look at what other tool providers are doing, those are the places where you could potentially build something that's very, very interesting and sellable and monetizable within this ecosystem.
That's really what I was trying to get at.
How you make money? Yeah.
How you position yourself, you know, and as a developer, I'm out of my element, right? So you need to understand it.
Do you understand a little bit better? That's actually what this session was about, was helping developers figure out what does this ecosystem look like and where potentially are my opportunities. Typically, it's around either the monetization of their published content or their ability to build tools. This is an industry that's crying out for tools.